single choice can reshape your entire future. Ilara knew this as her fingers closed around the ancient parchment in the royal archives. She was a cartographer, trained to document the known world, but her heart belonged to the forgotten one. Her mentors warned that chasing myths was a path to uncertainty, yet she could not ignore the whispers of Ethel, a lost island said to hold the secrets of the ancient seas and their legendary sailors. Taking this fragmented star chart was an act of defiance, one that could lead to exile, but she believed it was the only key to a truth the world had set aside. By the end of our journey, you will discover what it truly takes to bring a forgotten legend back to light, and why some mysteries are meant to be found. Where are you listening from right now, and what is the local time where you are? I always find it wonderful to feel connected across different places and moments. What happens when the only map to a lost world is considered a crime to possess? The flickering candlelight danced across the intricate lines of the star chart, its wax sputtering as Ilara's eyes traced constellations she had only ever read about in forbidden texts. For hours, she cross-referenced the parchment with tidal logs and crumbling diaries filled with old sailors' tales, her world shrinking to the desk in her hidden workshop. The breakthrough came not with a shout, but with a quiet, chilling certainty. The chart did not point to a simple location. It pinpointed a single, significant night when a rare celestial alignment would occur directly over the Serpent's maw, a stretch of ocean so challenging most captains marked it as unmappable and sailed wide around its churning waters. In her intense focus, the passing of time became meaningless. She completely missed her scheduled meeting with the head archivist, a compulsory review of her mapping duties. The absence would not go unnoticed. It was a direct breach of protocol, and in the tightly controlled world of the royal cartographers, an unexplained absence was as good as a confession. Guilt coiled in her stomach, a heavy counterweight to the exhilaration of discovery. She had taken a piece of history, betraying the trust of the institution that had shaped her. Yet, holding this key to a forgotten world, she felt a deeper conviction. These legends were not mere stories. They were a legacy on the verge of being erased, and she might be the only person left who could piece it back together. This left her with a daunting new problem. To reach the Serpent's maw during that brief celestial window, she would need a ship and a crew. She could not navigate those waters alone. It meant stepping out of the shadows of her scholarship and into the uncertain realm of action, trusting her life and her secret to outsiders who had no reason to believe the frantic words of a disgraced cartographer. The risk was no longer just expulsion from the archives. The chart in her possession was now a taken national treasure, and if the royal guards found her, her future would not be in exile, but in a very different kind of place. With the first secret of the chart now whispering to her, Ilara knew her next move was the most perilous yet. She had to find a captain who did not fear the legends of the maw, but was captivated by them. The air in the tavern was thick with the smell of salt and ale. Ilara found Captain Cayland in a corner, his large hands patiently working a needle through the heavy canvas of a torn sail. His ship, the Stormdancer, was visible through the grimy window, its mast being repaired in the harbor. He did not look up as she approached. When she spoke of Ethel and the star chart, his laughter was a short, sharp bark that silenced the nearby tables. He called it a fairy story, a fool's errand for scholars with no calluses on their hands. His distrust of landlubbers was a wall she could feel, but she saw it, a flicker in his eyes, a brief moment of recognition at the name Ethel that betrayed his scornful words. He knew something. He was not just dismissing a myth, he was guarding a secret. The argument stretched, her careful reasoning bouncing off his hardened skepticism. In a final, desperate move, Elara reached into her pouch and produced the sea pearl. It was no ordinary gem. It lay in her palm, glowing with a soft, internal light that pulsed like a slow, deep heartbeat. The gentle radiance illuminated the weathered lines of Cayland's face, and the needle in his hand went still. His gaze locked on the pearl, the mockery gone, replaced by a calculating silence. He was a man who respected what was real, and the magic in her hand was undeniably, tangibly real. He laid down his work. He would take the job, he said, but under two non-negotiable conditions. She would fund the entire expedition, providing for every supply and repair, and she would sail with them, sharing every wave and storm. Her fate would be bound to the cruise, with no safe return to shore if the journey failed. With a reluctant captain secured, Elara's next challenge was just as formidable. She had to find a crew from the dockside shadows, individuals who were either desperate enough for coin or adventurous enough in spirit to believe in a map to nowhere. The docks offered a gallery of the desperate and the daring. For 3 long days, Elara stood beside Cayland as a parade of hopefuls shuffled before them. They finally settled on 3. Lyra was a nimble rigger who could scale a rain-slicked mast in a gale, yet she confessed a deep, unsettling fear of the dark, open water below. Then there was Bram, the cook, a man who swore he could negotiate with the ocean's inhabitants for a good catch, and often muttered to his pots. The last was Finn, a navigator who never spoke, his silence as deep as the ocean, his eyes the color of sunlit sea foam. They were a collection of unique pieces, each brilliant in their own way, but their first meeting in the ship's hold was a storm of clashing personalities and sidelong glances. Lyra's anxiety was a visible tremor. Bram's eccentric stories were met with quiet patience, and Finn's quiet observation felt like careful study. Elara felt utterly lost. Her world was one of quiet study and precise lines on parchment, not the raw, unpredictable friction of human spirit. Her attempts to explain the celestial mechanics behind their voyage were met with blank stares or Bram's interruption about the proper way to season salted pork. Respect was not given with a title here. It was earned with calloused hands, so she stopped trying to lecture them. When the final crates of hardtack and water barrels arrived, she did not stand and supervise. She rolled up her sleeves, her scholar's hands protesting as she hauled the heavy supplies up the gangplank alongside them. That evening, as Lyra stared nervously at the darkening horizon, Elara pointed out the first emerging stars, naming them not as academic points, but as old friends that would guide them safely. It was a small gesture, but the crew's suspicion began to thaw into a slow, grudging acceptance. This fragile unity was shattered when Cayland returned from the market, his face grim. He placed a freshly printed notice onto the main mast. It was a detailed sketch of Elara, a description of the missing star chart, and a substantial reward offered by the head archivist for any information leading to her location. The air on the deck changed instantly. They were no longer just adventurers on a quest for understanding. They were companions in a shared journey, their faces now known to every informant and official in the port. The trust she had just begun to build was tested in an instant, each crew member weighing the promise of discovery against the very real challenge ahead. As the Stormdancer slipped its moorings under the cover of a thick, foggy dawn, the crew worked in a tense, shared silence. They knew the churning waters of the Serpent's maw were not the only trial they faced. They were sailing into the unknown, with others already on their trail. The first wave struck the Stormdancer like a giant's hand, sending a shudder through the very soul of the ship. They were in the maw now, a churning chaos of water and wind, where the sea was a living, breathing entity. Waves the color of slate crashed against jagged rocks that rose like broken teeth from the foam, and through the green, mist-shrouded water, strange creatures pulsed with an eerie, bioluminescent light, swimming alongside the hull as if escorting them to their fate. The ship groaned under the assault of unpredictable currents that seemed to pull in 3 directions at once. Then the squall hit, a sudden, violent wall of wind and rain that tore at the sails and turned the rigging into a deadly web of snapping lines. High above, Lyra was caught, her hands locked white-knuckled around a rope. The fear she had confessed now held her completely paralyzed, a small figure silhouetted against the raging sky. The mutinous whispers that had been circulating on the deck fell silent, replaced by the immediate, shared understanding that one of their own was in a very dangerous situation. Cayland's voice cut through the storm's roar, not with anger, but with a calm, iron authority. He thrust the helm into Alara's hands, his eyes locking with hers in a look of pure, unspoken trust. He then moved across the heaving deck with a sure-footed grace, climbing the treacherous, rain-slicked ropes to reach the frozen rigger. Below, Alara held the wheel, her arms straining against the sea's raw power. She guided the ship, not by the visible horizon, but by the celestial calculations burned into her memory, feeling the truth of her chart in every punishing wave. Just as Cayland secured a line around Lyra and began their careful descent, a massive serpentine shape broke the surface in the distance. It was only a glimpse, a dark, coiling form that slid beneath the waves, but it was enough. The legends of creatures guarding the passage were no longer stories. They were a startling, confirmed reality. As the squall passed as quickly as it had arrived, the crew, shaken but united by the rescue, stared ahead at what the storm had revealed. The churning fury of the maw gave way to an unnatural, glassy calm. The wind died completely, and the sea became a silent, black mirror, reflecting the brooding sky. This stillness felt far more ominous than the storm's rage, a silent sea that held its breath, waiting for their next move. The Stormdancer glided from the churning fury of the maw into a vast, glassy expanse, where the very air seemed to hold its breath. The wind died so completely that the sails hung limp and useless. Below, the water was a window, perfectly clear and impossibly deep, revealing a resting place of ancient shipwrecks scattered across the seabed. Galleons with shattered masts and strange, unfamiliar vessels with hulls like sea creatures lay preserved in the silent, sunken museum, a stark reminder of every soul who had tried and failed to cross this sea. With no breeze to fill their sails, the ship was becalmed, adrift on a mirror of infinite stillness. Their progress halted completely. Each passing day saw their water barrels dip lower and their supply of hardtack dwindle, turning measured rations into a source of growing concern. The crew's initial anxiety settled into quiet reflection. Lyra would stare into the abyss, her unease around the dark water, now magnified by the spectral fleet resting below. Bram's cheerful muttering to his pots fell silent. Only Finn, the quiet navigator, seemed undisturbed. He spent hours at the rail, his sunlit sea foam eyes fixed on the depths, as if listening to a conversation only he could hear. Driven by a rising urgency, Alara scoured her memory for any clue. She recalled a fragmented text, a sailor's account of a similar stillness, mentioning that the old mariners had not waited for the wind. They had made their own, convincing the weary crew was its own challenge, but with no other option, they lowered the ship's longboats into the water. The crew took turns at the oars, a back-breaking effort that slowly, agonizingly, began to pull the heavy stormdancer forward through the unnatural calm. The rhythmic groan of the oarlocks and the splash of paddles were the only sounds in the immense quiet, a testament to their sheer will against the sea's stubborn peace. It was during this grueling labor that Bram, leaning over the side during a rest, grew unusually still. He claimed his conversations with the fish had taken a serious turn. The creatures spoke of something ancient and vast that slumbered in the mud and rock far below, something that had not stirred in ages, and they whispered a warning. The steady, percussive rhythm of their rowing was a distant drum, a disturbance slowly filtering down into the deep, coaxing the sleeper from its rest. The stakes were no longer just dwindling supplies. They were rowing directly over a presence older than their oldest legends. Just as the effort began to feel utterly futile, a miracle broke the horizon. Finn, who had not spoken a word the entire voyage, suddenly stood and pointed. His arm was steady, his gaze fixed on a single, twisting column of water, spiraling up from the sea in the distance. A lone waterspout, a sign of immense energy and motion in the dead calm. It was not a safe harbor, but it was a change, a focal point in the featureless void, and it pulled at them with the force of a newfound hope. The solitary waterspout did not fade into the mist. It moved, a coiling pillar of water and light that swept around the stormdancer in a slow, deliberate circle, its roar softening into a voice like a river flowing over ancient stones. The form it took was not quite solid, a shimmering, translucent giant whose eyes held the deep pressure of the abyss. "You seek the old world," it spoke, its words vibrating in their bones. But passage is not free. The price is a story of true courage from each soul aboard. Fail to move me, and your ship will join the silent fleet below. A heavy silence fell, broken only by the gentle lapping of water against the hull. The Guardian's challenge was a mirror held up to each of them, demanding they look upon a part of themselves they had tried to forget. Lyra was the first to speak, her voice a fragile thread. She confessed that her greatest act of courage was not climbing a mast in a storm, but admitting her fear of the deep to her first crew, an honesty that cost her their respect, but allowed her to find a different kind of strength. Bram followed, his usual cheer gone. He told of a time he abandoned a sinking ship in a panic, leaving shipmates behind, a choice that haunted his dreams and fueled his endless, cheerful chatter to keep the memory at bay. Finn, the quiet navigator, surprised them all. In a voice rough with disuse, he spoke of a mutiny he chose not to join, a decision that branded him a coward in the eyes of his friends, but let him keep his integrity. Each story was a raw, personal truth laid bare before the magical judge and their crewmates, a confession that stripped away all pretense. Finally, all eyes turned to Alara. She stepped forward, her heart pounding. She had no grand tale of personal bravery to offer, no single moment of heroic defiance. Instead, she opened her hands, as if holding the story itself. She spoke of the forgotten realms. She told the guardian of a civilization of sailors who did not conquer the sea, but learned its songs, who built not with stone and conquest, but with understanding and respect. Her story was not of one person's courage, but of a people's collective spirit, a greatness lost not to failure, but to time. It was a story of belief, a conviction that their legacy was worth any risk to recover. The waterspout was silent for a long moment, its luminous form pulsing thoughtfully. "You offer no proof of your own heart," it said to Alara, "only a belief in the hearts of others. But a promise of courage to come can be stronger than a memory of courage past. Your passage is granted." The entity's form began to dissolve, its voice fading into a whisper on the wind. "But remember, the path ahead holds deeper challenges than I." The shimmering pillar collapsed into a soft, fresh rain that washed the salt from the decks, and as the last drop fell, a steady, warm wind filled the sails, pulling the storm dancer with purpose toward a chain of misty islands that now rose from the horizon, previously hidden from all sight. The black sand crunched under their boots, a sound like grinding glass in the unnerving quiet of the cove. The very air hummed, thick with a static energy that raised the hairs on their arms. All around them, the ghostly sailors of Ethel moved in a silent, shimmering dance. They hauled on ropes that were not there, mended sails that had long since turned to dust, their translucent faces etched with a purpose that had outlasted their physical forms. The crew huddled together, their earlier bravado vanished. Lyra gripped a knife hilt, her knuckles white, while Bram made a warding sign with his fingers. The phantoms paid them no mind, locked in an endless replay of their final, frantic moments before the cataclysm. Alara's heart ached with a scholar's desperation. She rushed from one shimmering figure to the next, her voice pleading as she asked what happened, how their world fell where the knowledge was hidden. Her words passed through them like smoke. They were perfect, tragic echoes, a recording on the air itself, and they offered no answers, only a deeper, more profound mystery. The frustration was a physical weight on her shoulders. They had crossed an impossible sea, only to find a library where every book was written in a language of light and memory, utterly unreadable. Just as despair began to tighten its grip, Cayland, who had been watching the spectral pageant with a strange, distant look in his eyes, began to hum. It was a low, gravelly tune, then the words formed, an old sea shanty his grandfather had sung, one he said was older than their own kingdom. He sang of lost shores and faithful stars, his voice rough but steady against the hum of the cove. The effect was immediate and chilling. One by one, the ghostly sailors stopped their eternal tasks. Their heads turned in unison, no longer looking through the living, but directly at them. The empty spaces where their eyes should have been now held a sharp, focused awareness. the entire beach fell into a deeper, waiting silence. The gathered spirits did not speak. Instead, as one, they raised their arms, their translucent fingers pointing past the beach, past the tree line, toward the dark, brooding peaks of the island's heart. It was a silent command, a directive filled with such profound importance that it brooked no question. The path they indicated led away from the relative safety of the shore and into a dense, waiting jungle that seemed to swallow all sound. The jungle swallowed them whole, a wall of emerald green and twisted vines where the very air felt thick enough to drink. Their first steps were met with an immediate, unnerving phenomenon. Every snap of a twig underfoot, every hissed instruction, was thrown back at them a moment later, warped and distorted. Bram's grunt of effort returned as a low, guttural laugh. Lyra's whisper to stay close echoed back as a taunting hiss. It was not a simple repetition, but a mockery of their own voices, a psychological assault that frayed their already taut nerves. The rigger, already grappling with the lingering unease from the Ghostly Cove, felt the twisted echoes as a personal torment. He clapped his hands over his ears, his eyes wide with building alarm, convinced the jungle itself was jeering at his deepest insecurities. When his own panicked shout came back to him as a shrieking cackle, he broke. With a strangled cry, he turned and bolted blindly into the dense undergrowth, vanishing from sight in a matter of heartbeats. His disappearance sent a shock of cold dread through the group. They called his name, but their shouts were immediately corrupted and flung back at them from a dozen wrong directions, creating a maddening cacophony that made a coherent search impossible. Splitting up felt dangerous, but staying together meant covering no ground. Precious minutes slipped away as they fought both the suffocating foliage and the auditory maze, their hope thinning with every distorted echo of their own frantic voices. It was Bram who finally broke the cycle. The cook closed his eyes, took a deep, steadying breath, and went utterly still. He forced his mind to quiet, to stop fighting the echoes, and instead listen through them, focusing on the natural symphony of the jungle beneath the noise. He strained to hear the rustle of leaves, the drip of water, the hum of insects, and then he heard it, a sound so soft and genuine, and the echoes could not replicate it, the faint, terrified whimpers of a man trying not to be heard. Following that thread of true sound, they pushed through a final curtain of hanging moss and found him. The rigger was trapped in a thicket of sinuous, vine-like plants that had coiled around his legs and torso, their grip tightening with every frantic struggle. The vines were a deep, unsettling purple, and small, bud-like mouths lined their surfaces, dripping a clear, viscous fluid that sizzled where it touched his leather boots. It was a frantic, tense rescue. They worked at the constricting plants with knives and a hatchet, the vines thrashing as if alive, their sappy residue staining the dark earth. The moment the rigger was pulled free, shaking and pale, the group did not pause to rest. They pressed onward with a new, grim determination, hacking a path forward until the oppressive green suddenly gave way. They emerged at the foot of a colossal stone temple, its ancient blocks draped in moss and vines. Before them stood a massive, seamless door, and across its surface, intricate carvings of waves, stars, and sea creatures shifted and flowed as if alive, a silent, mesmerizing puzzle guarding whatever lay within. The living carvings on the temple door told a story in flowing stone. They showed the Ethelian sailors not as conquerors, but as partners with the sea, their ships gliding alongside leviathans, their hands raised to the stars in a silent, harmonious dialogue. The carvings depicted their golden age, cities of pearlescent light that pulsed with the ocean's rhythm, and then the sudden, quiet moment of their transition. One frame showed them looking up in unison, not in fear, but in a kind of sorrowful acceptance, as their entire civilization dissolved into shimmering motes of light, leaving their ships to drift as echoes of another time. The story ended, and the carvings flowed into a new pattern, forming 3 empty basins set into the door's surface. There was no lock, no keyhole, only a silent request for a specific offering. A low rumble echoed through the temple grounds as 3 hidden passages opened in the surrounding jungle wall, each leading to a different annex. From the left passage, a soft, silvery glow pulsed with the rhythm of a sleeping heart. From the right, a deep, swallowing darkness seemed to absorb the very light around it, and from the central, tallest passage, a faint, crystalline chiming could be heard, like 1,000 tiny bells. The challenge was clear. The 3 basins required water from 3 impossible sources: liquid moonlight, liquid shadow, and liquid starlight, and they would have to separate to find them. Ilara's decision was immediate. She would take the central path to the starlight pool, for its entrance was carved with a perfect, if ancient, star chart. The others split the remaining tasks, their faces set with a quiet understanding of the risk. Stepping into her chosen annex was like stepping into the night sky itself. The floor was a mosaic of inlaid crystals, a sprawling map of constellations that shifted under her feet. One misstep, one foot placed on a star that did not belong in the current alignment, and she knew the outcome would be significant. She moved with a painstaking slowness, her mind racing through celestial mechanics, her body following the pathways she had spent a lifetime studying on parchment. It was a dance with the cosmos, each step a silent prayer. From the other annexes, the sounds of effort filtered back. Lyra, in the spring of liquid moonlight, had to navigate a bridge of solidified light beams that flickered in and out of existence over a deep chasm. Bram, seeking the waterfall of shadow, found himself in a chamber of pure silence and darkness, where the only way to locate the falling curtain of blackness was to shut his eyes and trust his other senses completely. Just as Ilara carefully filled her vial with the shimmering, chiming liquid starlight, a deep grinding sound echoed through the entire temple complex. From alcoves they had not even noticed, stone figures began to stir, their monolithic forms turning with the sound of grinding granite, their blank stone eyes now scanning the corridors for those who had entered. They reconvened at the main door, breathless and clutching their vials. The waters swirled with captured magic, one silver, one black, one filled with 1,000 pinpricks of light. But as they moved to pour the offerings into the basins, the sound of heavy, deliberate footsteps grew louder. The stone guardians were now fully awake, emerging from the jungle shadows and the temple archways, their massive forms blocking any escape, their slow, steady advance shaking the very ground beneath their feet. The stone guardians advanced with the crushing inevitability of a tide, their obsidian and coral forms scraping against the ancient stone floor. Each step was a low tremor that vibrated up through the crew's boots. Swords and axes glanced off their limbs with a shower of harmless sparks. A direct fight was not just hopeless, it was impossible. The crew scattered, diving behind massive pillars and into narrow side corridors, the air filling with the frantic sounds of their retreat and the relentless, grinding pursuit. In the chaos, they were split apart. Cayland and the silent navigator, Finn, became a loud, distracting target, shouting and banging their weapons to draw the monolithic sentinels away from the main door. This left Ilara, Lyra, and Bram at the basins, their hands shaking as they uncorked the vials, the magical waters within glowing with an urgent light. Just as a guardian turned its blank, blue glowing gaze toward them, its massive hand rising to strike, Finn did the unthinkable. He broke from cover and ran not away, but directly toward the creature. He placed his bare hands flat against its coral-plated leg and began to hum. It was not the shanty Cayland had sung on the beach, but a deeper, more resonant note that seemed to vibrate from the stone itself. The guardian froze, its glowing eyes dimmed, then brightened again, swiveling down to study the small figure at its feet. It tilted its head in a gesture of ancient, mechanical curiosity. The hum was a key, a genetic memory passed down through bloodlines, and Finn was a living echo of the builders. The other guardians slowed, their coordinated hunt disrupted by this sudden, silent communication. But the effort cost Finn dearly. The color drained from his face, and he swayed on his feet, his hands dropping from the stone as if the contact had burned him. The magic required to speak to the old stones was a toll paid from his own life force. Seeing the momentary pause, Ilara did not hesitate. In one fluid motion, she poured the vials. Liquid moonlight swirled with liquid shadow, and both were pierced by 1,000 points of chiming starlight. The basins drank the offerings, and with a deep, resonant groan that shook the entire temple, the seamless door began to grind inward, revealing not a dark chamber, but a space awash with a soft, pearlescent glow. The air inside the temple was cool and still, carrying the scent of ozone and old, deep earth. Before them, under the open circle of sky in the domed chamber, a miniature ocean hung in the air. It was a perfect, swirling map of the Forgotten Realms, complete with tiny, glowing islands and currents of liquid light, a breathtaking model of the world they had crossed. But its light was dim, its motion sluggish. This was the Heart of Ethel, the source of the ancient harmony with the seas, and it was fading. Ilara understood instantly. This was not a vault of gold or jewels, but a control room, and its power was waning. A soft, ethereal voice, like the chiming of the starlight water, echoed in the chamber. To restore the heart, it whispered, required a fuel more potent than magic. It required a gift of memory, a personal story of the sea, offered freely to awaken the ancient machine. One by one, the crew stepped forward. Cayland closed his eyes and offered the vivid recollection of his first ship, a small fishing vessel where he learned the feel of a tiller and the taste of true freedom. As the memory left him, a visible weight seemed to lift from his shoulders, and a section of the miniature ocean near a carved coastline brightened, its waters swirling with new energy. Lyra gave up the comforting memory of a safe harbor, a specific, hidden bay, where she had once found shelter from a storm and felt completely secure for the first time in her life. A tear traced a path through the grime on her cheek as that feeling faded, and another part of the map glowed. Bram, his face uncharacteristically solemn, surrendered the bittersweet recollection of a lost love. a face and a voice he had carried with him across countless voyages. The central sea on the model bloomed with a soft, warm light, the waves moving with a stronger, more rhythmic pulse. The chamber fell silent once more. The heart was almost restored, its light now a steady, gentle luminescence, but one final, crucial connection remained dark. The central island of Ethel on the model was still a dull, gray shape. The voice spoke again, its tone gentle but firm. The final memory required was the catalyst, the one that began the entire journey. It was Alara's. She had to offer the very reason she had sought the legends, the core memory of what drove her to take the star chart and change her entire life. To give that up would be to forget her purpose, the scholarly passion that had defined her. She would save the legend, but she would no longer remember why it mattered to her. The crew watched her, their faces a mixture of awe and sorrow. They had offered pieces of their pasts, but she was being asked to offer the compass of her future. Taking a deep, steadying breath, Alara closed her eyes and reached for the memory, preparing to give the story of herself for the sake of all the stories yet to be told. The light coalesced not into a voice, but a form. From the shimmering heart of the miniature ocean, a figure stepped onto the stone floor, a being woven from sea foam and starlight. This was the last keeper of the forgotten realms, its eyes holding the deep, patient weariness of one who has watched the stars turn for 1,000 lifetimes. It had been waiting, it explained, its voice the soft crash of a distant wave, not for a hero to conquer, but for a steward to remember. The great fading was not a violent end, it revealed, but a quiet one. The magic of the ancient seas did not break, it simply withered, as the world grew louder and more certain, as people stopped listening to the whispers in the tides and the stories in the stars, the connection frayed. The legends became myths, then fairy tales, then nothing at all, because the collective faith and wonder that powered them had been forgotten on distant shores. The keeper's gaze settled on Alara. The ritual required a successor, one who would bind their spirit to this temple, becoming the new anchor for the world's fading magic. It was a life of solitude, a permanent vigil to ensure the balance of the seas. She could make the ultimate commitment, giving up her life as she knew it to become the new keeper, or she could walk away with her crew, her memory and freedom intact, and watch the last light of the forgotten realms flicker and die forever. Alara looked from the ethereal being to the faces of her crew. She saw Cayland's weathered respect, Lyra's hard-won courage, Bram's quiet loyalty. She thought of the wider world, so unaware of the delicate harmony it was losing. Her quest had begun for knowledge, to prove a theory and satisfy a scholar's hunger. But here, at the end of all things, she understood that preserving the wonder itself was infinitely more important than her personal understanding of it. With a calm that surprised her, she gave her answer, "I accept." The moment the words left her lips, she felt a gentle pulling at the core of her mind. The memory she had been prepared to offer, the vivid, driving image of the first time she saw the star chart and felt the call of the unknown, simply dissolved. It was gone, not like a forgotten dream, but like a page cleanly turned. The personal spark that ignited her entire journey was now a blank space, but into that void poured an ocean. The collective memory and wisdom of every ancient sailor, every star reader, every soul who had ever sailed in harmony with the seas flooded into her. She felt the weight of generations, the joy of 1,000 discoveries, the silent understanding of the ocean's deepest moods. As the new keeper, Alara felt the power of the seas flow into her, not as a crushing force, but as a familiar current. In the center of the chamber, the miniature ocean blazed with a brilliant, stable light, its waters swirling with vibrant, untamed life, the connection to the world fully and permanently restored. The sea itself seemed to hold its breath for her first command. Alara did not raise her hands or speak a word. She simply turned her attention, now part of the ocean's vast consciousness, toward the treacherous waters of the Serpent's maw. Across the distance, the churning chaos stilled. The jagged rocks that had once threatened to tear their ship apart now seemed to withdraw, and the waves gentled into a steady, purposeful swell. On the deck of the Stormdancer, the crew felt the change in an instant. The ship no longer fought the water. It glided forward as if carried on the palm of a giant, benevolent hand. The journey home transforming from a desperate flight into a serene procession. The awe they felt was tinged with a new and profound distance. Their cartographer was gone, replaced by a figure who stood at the rail, her eyes reflecting the depth of entire oceans. She was with them, yet part of something infinitely larger, and they hesitated, unsure whether to offer a word of thanks or kneel in reverence. Sensing the gulf her transformation had created, Alara turned from the sea to her friends. She would not let her new duty erase the bonds forged in their shared trial. With a soft focus of her will, she reached out to each of them. She did not take anything away, but instead gave a piece of the ocean's understanding. To the rigger, whose fear had once frozen him in the storm, she gifted a sudden, clear vision of the deep, not as a void of darkness, but as a realm of majestic, living light. His lingering tension melted away, replaced by a calm curiosity. To Bram, she granted the true meaning behind the murmurs and clicks he had always tried to interpret. The next time, a dolphin crested beside the ship. Its playful chatter resolved in his mind, not as random noise, but as a greeting and a warning of a coming squall far to the east. And for Finn, the silent navigator, she gently loosened the old, psychological knot that had stolen his voice for so long. He drew a sharp, startled breath, and the first word he spoke in years was a quiet, wondering thank you that brought tears to Lyra's eyes. Finally, her gaze settled on Cayland. She offered to restore the vibrant memory of his greatest solo voyage, a tale of youthful triumph he had often lamented losing to time. The captain looked at her, his expression a complex mix of pride and sorrow, and shook his head. He would not trade the sharp, perfect memory of this journey, of watching her become who she was meant to be, for any glory of the past. He chose to keep their story intact, a personal treasure more valuable than any legend. United once more, but forever changed, they watched the familiar coastline of their home appear on the horizon. They were not returning as the same outcasts who had left. They were carriers of a secret that would reshape their world's understanding of history, and the simple welcome they might have expected was now the least of their concerns. The Stormdancer cut through the water, not like a ship of wood and sail, but like a blade of solidified light, its hull gleaming with a soft, internal luminescence that painted the familiar harbor in hues of pearl and aquamarine. A wind that touched no other ship kept its sails perpetually full, guiding it to the very dock where the head archivist, and a full contingent of royal guards stood waiting. Yet their drawn swords were slowly lowered, their faces masks of stunned disbelief. The entire harbor, normally a choppy, bustling stretch of water, was preternaturally calm, its surface a sheet of glass reflecting the clear sky, the water so transparent they could see every shell and stone on the seabed far below. The head archivist stepped forward, his eyes wide, his voice stripped of its usual authority and filled with a trembling awe. He demanded to know what they had done, what power they had brought back. The crew stood in a tense line, the unspoken truth of the heart, a heavy weight in the silence between them. To reveal the existence of such a source of magic would be to invite a new kind of conquest, one that would surely shatter the delicate balance Alara now protected. The wrong word here could doom the Forgotten Realms all over again. It was Alara who moved then, stepping from the rail with a new, unshakable grace. She met the archivist's gaze, and her voice, when she spoke, was calm and practical. She told him they had not found treasure or weapons, they had found knowledge. She spoke of rediscovering forgotten sea lanes, charted by ancient mariners, pathways through the ocean that avoided the worst of the currents and the fury of the Serpent's maw. She presented this not as a myth, but as a cartographic break through, a gift of safer passage for every ship that would sail from this port. It was a story woven from threads of truth, a practical marvel that the authorities could understand, measure, and celebrate. The suspicion on the archivist's face melted into the dawning excitement of a scholar, presented with a lost chapter of his own life's work. Her reputation, once tarnished by theft, was now being burnished with the glow of a monumental discovery. As the crowd began to murmur and disperse, the immediate threat faded, but a deeper unease settled over the crew. They saw the hungry looks in the eyes of certain merchants and officials, individuals who had heard the wild rumors and now saw the impossible evidence of their ship. The secret of the heart was safe for now, but the scent of power they had brought back with them would draw other, less scrupulous seekers. Their journey had not ended their troubles, it had simply changed their nature. When the dock was nearly clear, Cayland approached Alara, his expression not one of relief, but of grim determination. He stood beside her, both of them watching the last of the officials walk away. "We have one more voyage to make," he said, his voice low and steady. "This one is not about discovery. It is about safeguarding what we found. We need to create a new chart, one only we can rid, and hide the true routes to Ethel forever." The workshop smelled of salt and old parchment, but the maps spread across Alara's desk now glowed with a soft, internal light. She traced the coastlines with a finger, the ink shimmering and shifting to show hidden currents only she could perceive. Cayland stood in the doorway for a long moment, watching her. He finally stepped inside, his voice quiet but firm. He told her that hiding was a temporary solution for a permanent truth. Instead of concealing the legend, he proposed they build a shield around it. He wanted to found a new order of sailors, using the Stormdancer as their flagship. They would patrol the forgotten routes, turning their ship into a mobile guardian for the temple and its legacy. Alara's hand stilled on the glowing vellum. She saw the wisdom in his plan, but also the immense danger. Inviting others in, no matter how well-intentioned, felt like lighting a beacon in the dark. What if one of these new sailors proved unworthy? A single moment of greed or carelessness, could unravel everything they had worked so hard to preserve. The risk was a cold stone in her chest. She spent the night on the workshop's small balcony, watching the constellations wheel overhead, feeling the gentle pulse of the heart across the vast distance. By the time the first hint of dawn painted the sky, she had her answer. She would agree, but the selection would be hers. They would not seek the most skilled sailors, but the right ones. The true test would not be their knot tying or their navigation, but the quiet reverence in their eyes when they spoke of the sea. And so, a quiet rumor began to circulate through the taverns and docks. It spoke of a new kind of sailing master, one who sought apprentices not for plunder or trade, but for a higher purpose. It attracted a curious mix of hopeful young dreamers who felt the ocean's call and weathered old salts, who had long suspected the waves held deeper secrets. Each applicant was met with a single, searching question from the woman with ocean-deep eyes, a question that had nothing to do with sailing and everything to do with the soul. They were not just recruiting a crew, they were planting the seeds of a new legend, one that would either become the enduring protector of the ancient world or the very key to its final undoing. The young dockhand stood before Cayland, his hands calloused from hauling crates, not ropes. His name was Finn, an orphan who had grown up on the whispers of the harbor, and he carried the scent of salt and solitude. He made his request with a quiet intensity, his gaze fixed on the weathered captain, confessing he had no ship experience beyond watching them come and go. He spoke of a feeling, a deep, magnetic pull from the ocean that had guided his entire life, an instinct that let him sense a coming squall hours before the barometer dropped. Cayland's response was a skeptical frown, his mind on the practical needs of a ship, not the whims of a dreamer. But Alara, who had been observing from the ship's rail, stepped forward. Her new connection to the sea's vast consciousness hummed in recognition. She saw in this boy an echo of their own silent navigator, a raw, untapped channel to the same ancient magic they sought to protect. She proposed a test, not of skill, but of spirit. They would take a small, open skiff to the jagged teeth of the Serpent's tooth reef. Finn would be blindfolded, his only compass the feeling in his bones and the subtle song of the water. The air was tense as they rowed to the reef's edge, the crew of the Stormdancer watching from their ship. Finn stood alone in the skiff, the rough cloth tied over his eyes, his knuckles white on the tiller. The fear was a living thing in his chest, a cold dread that this would be the moment he proved every doubter in the harbor right. He was not a sailor. He was a boy from the docks, and this was madness. But as the first wave nudged the small boat toward the labyrinth of sharp coral, he did something extraordinary. He stopped fighting the terror. He let it wash over him, and in its wake he listened. He heard the water's gentle push against the hull, not as a random force, but as a guiding hand. He felt the subtle shift in current that indicated a safe channel, the different resonance of the water flowing over deep rock versus shallow, knife-edged coral. He began to turn the tiller, not with the certainty of knowledge, but with the faith of feeling. The skiff moved with a breathtaking, unnatural grace. It slipped between pillars of razor-sharp coral, with only a hand's breadth to spare, dancing on currents the crew could not even see. From the deck of the Stormdancer, it looked less like navigation, and more like a form of communion, the boy and the sea moving as one entity. When the skiff finally cleared the far side of the reef into open, calm water, a collective breath was released. Finn pulled off the blindfold, his body trembling not from fear, but from the profound effort of listening. His success was more than a personal triumph. It was living proof. The magic of the Forgotten Realms was not a relic locked away in a temple. It was a seed, dormant in the blood and spirit of new generations, waiting only for the right conditions to awaken. The hope that filled them was brighter and more solid than any treasure. With Finn welcomed as their first official recruit, the newly named sailors of the renewed realms set their sails for their first training voyage. The mood aboard the Stormdancer was electric with purpose. The crew now mentors to this living embodiment of their mission. As they left the harbor, a pod of dolphins appeared, their sleek forms cutting through the waves not as curious onlookers, but as escorts, their playful clicks and whistles sounding like a language of approval, a welcome from the sea itself to its newest guardians. The Navigator's hand shot out, his finger trembling as he pointed toward a horizon that held nothing but empty sky. Leech, the single word was a whisper, yet it fell over the deck with the weight of an anchor. An immediate, instinctive dread gripped the crew. The vibrant blue of the sea around the Stormdancer began to pale, the color washing out as if a great stain were spreading beneath the surface. A deep, unnatural chill radiated from the water, and the very light seemed to dim. On the ship, Ilara's breath caught. Though miles away, her connection to the Heart of Ethel flared with a sharp, defensive pain. She felt it then, a presence in the deep, a void that fed on life and magic. It was a predator, ancient and patient, drawn by the renewed energy pulsing from the temple, and it had found them. It was hunting. Cayland's voice cut through the paralyzing fear, his command clear and immediate. Hard to starboard. We are not leading this thing home. The ship groaned as it came about, its bow turning to face the terrifying emptiness. This was the moment their new purpose was forged, not in quiet study, but in fire. Their enemy was not a thing they could fight with steel. It was a hunger, a force that devoured wonder itself, and their only weapons were the fragile magic they carried and the strength of their unified will. As the last of the sea's color faded to a sickly gray, the wind died in their sails, and a thick, oily fog began to coil around the ship, swallowing all sound until the world was reduced to a silent, waiting shroud. The fog clung to them like a shroud of forgotten dreams. It was so thick, the crew could not see past the ship's railings, a blindness that seeped into their minds. This was no ordinary mist. It carried a psychic chill, a weight of despair that whispered of every past disappointment and every hope that had ever faded. Lyra remembered the mocking laughter of old crews, the sting of being left behind. Bram was back on that sinking ship, the cold water rising, his own panic a betrayer. Even Cayland, his hands on the wheel, felt his certainty crumble. Had he led them all to a meaningless end, trading a life of honest, sailing for a fantasy? His grip loosened, the polished wood slipping from his fingers as the will to fight drained from him. They were being undone not by tooth or claw, but by their own memories, their convictions twisted into instruments of surrender. Ilara felt the assault as a cold pressure against her spirit, but the Heart of Ethel within her was a steady, warm ember that the fog could not extinguish. She understood then that force was useless. You could not punch a shadow or confront a regret. Their only weapon was a counter melody, a thread of light to weave the darkness back together. Her voice, when it came, was thin and wavering at first. A simple sea shanty Cayland had sung in the Ghostly Cove. She poured the ocean's magic not into a shield, but into the melody, weaving the memory of safe harbors and steadfast stars into every note. It was a fragile sound against the oppressive silence. Then, a second voice joined hers, rough and unsteady. It was Finn, the new recruit, his eyes screwed shut against the despair, singing the only words he remembered. One by one, the crew grasped this lifeline. Lyra's voice strengthened with the memory of a rescue in the storm. Bram sang with the echo of a cherished smile, giving him courage. Cayland's baritone rumbled back to life, his hands reclaiming the wheel as he remembered the trust in Alara's eyes. Their combined hope became a tangible force, a resonance that pushed at the fog, thinning its grip. The gray shroud began to tear, and for a single, heart-stopping moment, they saw what hunted them. Just beneath the waves, a vast, shadowy form drifted, a presence that was not flesh but hunger and absence itself, a void that fed on light and life. The world tore open just off the starboard bow. It was not a creature of flesh and scale, but a wound in the sea itself, a shifting hole in reality that devoured the light and sound around it. The groan that erupted was not from a beast's throat, but from the very planks of the Stormdancer, the wood straining as if being pulled toward this silent, ravenous void. Hope itself felt thin and frayed, a thread being tugged into the emptiness. Lyra unleashed a bolt of searing, magical light, a brilliant lance meant to pierce the darkness. It flew true, and then it was gone, consumed without a sound. The leech pulsed, its form swelling, its hunger magnified by the very energy meant to destroy it. Each attack only made it stronger, a terrifying paradox that threatened to undo them all. In the panic silence that followed, the quiet navigator, Finn, did not shout. He turned to Alara, his eyes wide with a terrifying clarity. "We cannot fight the emptiness," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "We must fill it." The solution was not to oppose its nature, but to overwhelm it with something it could not digest. Alara understood in a flash of profound insight. She closed her eyes, and instead of gathering power for an assault, she opened herself completely. She reached into the Heart of Ethel and channeled the simplest, most constant truth of the ocean, the eternal memory of the tides. It was not a burst of energy, but a gentle, endless stream, the rhythm of the moon's pull, the patient rise and fall of waters on 1,000 shores, a cycle as old as the world and as infinite as time. She offered the leech a song with no climax and no end. The void thrashed, its form flickering wildly between the real and the unreal. It was designed to consume conflict, to feed on spikes of power and emotion, but this placid, endless flow was like trying to drink the entire sky. It could not process this fundamental, non-resistant constant. Its edges blurred and bled into the mist, its coherence shattered by a force it was never built to comprehend. Seeing the entity's destabilizing form, Cayland's voice ripped through the chaos. Hard to starboard now, he spun the wheel, and the Stormdancer responded, heeling over as a sudden, clean wind, untouched by the leech's influence, caught its sails and pulled them from the grip of the dissolving emptiness. A warm, golden light began to bloom within the ship, radiating not from the planks, but from the hearts of the crew. Alara's voice was a steady anchor, guiding them not to fight, but to remember. One by one, they closed their eyes and reached for their most cherished moments with the sea. Lyra pictured the first time she saw a bioluminescence light up a midnight wake, a trail of living stars. Bram remembered the taste of fresh rain on his face after a long drought, a gift from the ocean sky. Cayland held tight to the memory of his daughter's laughter, echoing across a calm harbor. They focused every ounce of their will, pouring these pure, joyful memories into the void. The effort was deeply draining, like sharing light from their very souls. Finn stood at the center of it all, his face a mask of intense concentration. He did not offer a single memory. He reached for the source itself, the raw, untamed wonder he had felt since childhood, the instinctual love that was the core of his being, and he offered it all. It was a profound gamble, a personal offering that risked leaving him feeling adrift, his greatest gift given to the unknown. The leech thrashed violently, its form a chaotic swirl of conflicting energies. It was a presence designed for shadow, now met with a feast of light and life. The simple joy of a dolphin's leap, the profound comfort of a lighthouse beam cutting through fog, the awe of an endless horizon. These were forces it could not consume. The void filled with a light it was never meant to hold, and with a silent, blinding flash that washed the world in pure white, it was simply gone. The sea returned, calm and ordinary. An immense, echoing peace settled over the water and the ship. On the deck, Finn swayed, his face pale as parchment, but a slow, genuine smile touched his lips as Lyra and Bram rushed to support him. He was not empty. His connection to the ocean was no longer a mysterious, external pull, but something earned and deeply personal, a quiet understanding woven into the fabric of his own spirit. Floating on the calm water, where the leech had dissolved, was a single, perfect sphere. It was the color of a moonless midnight, yet within its depths swirled a tiny, captured galaxy of silver and violet, a beautiful echo of the space they had just filled with light. Alara reached down and lifted it from the sea. It was cool and impossibly smooth, and she felt no ill will from it, only a profound, neutral stillness. The chaotic hunger was gone, replaced by a perfect balance, a tool of pure potential. Back aboard the Stormdancer, the crew gathered around the Pearl, their awe quickly giving way to a tense debate. Bram argued for leaving it in the deepest trench they could find, a dangerous power that had no place in their world. Lyra saw its potential as a shield, a way to protect their ship from any future threat. Cayland remained silent, his gaze fixed on Alara, waiting for the judgment of their keeper. She held the pearl in her palm, feeling its stabilized nature. It was not a weapon, she told them. It was a blank page, a space of pure possibility, and the greatest thing they could ever conceal was not a treasure, but the truth itself. She proposed they use it to weave a permanent, living mist around the entire archipelago of Ethel, a cloak that would respond not to charts or courage, but to the intent in a sailor's heart. Only those who sought understanding, not conquest, would ever find their way through. This decision settled over the crew with the weight of a final vow. They would not just be guardians, they would become gatekeepers, a quiet, lasting order whose purpose would be passed down like the most cherished of traditions, a duty stretching far beyond their own lifetimes. As Alara closed her hands around the dark pearl and channeled her will through it, a magnificent sight unfolded on the horizon. A bank of soft, luminous mist began to rise from the sea, climbing like a slow, gentle tide until it shrouded the distant islands completely. It was not a menacing fog, but a beautiful, shifting veil of silver and pearl, a lasting boundary between the everyday world and the sacred, remembered one. The temple and its heart were now safe, sheltered within a blanket of peaceful quiet, waiting only for the right hearts to find the way. The silence on the deck was different now, filled not with absence, but with a profound and waiting peace. It was the Navigator who broke it, not with a hum or a gesture, but with a clear, steady voice that carried the weight of the ages. He told them of a lineage passed in secret from father to son, a bloodline that stretched back to the very masons who had laid the temple's first stone. He was the last, and his duty was not done. The physical Heart of Ethel required a keeper for its stone and mortar, a guardian to tend the carvings and ensure the island itself did not crumble back into the sea. His announcement settled over them like a gentle, final wave, a truth they had all felt but never spoken. For Cayland, the parting was a physical ache. The deep, unspoken bond they had forged, a language of shared glances and mutual respect that required no words, was now facing a permanent separation. The captain's weathered face, usually a mask of stoic resolve, showed a rare crack of emotion, a silent farewell to his closest friend. Then the Navigator turned his sunlit seafoam eyes to Finn. He offered the young man a choice, a path that diverged sharply from the life of a sailor. He could come to the island, not as a visitor, but as an apprentice. He would learn the deepest secrets of the temple's magic, the language of stone, and the songs of the sea that were woven into the very foundations of the place. It was an invitation to immense knowledge, but also to a life of profound isolation, a vigil spent in quiet study, far from the open ocean and the camaraderie of a crew. Finn looked from the Navigator's earnest face to the family he had found aboard the Stormdancer. He saw Lyra's supportive smile, Bram's nod of respect, and Alara's calm understanding. The pull was immense, a calling that resonated with the very core of his gift. He understood then that some truths were too fragile to be carried into the world. They needed to be nurtured in solitude, protected by those willing to sacrifice a life of adventure for a lifetime of guardianship. With a quiet certainty that belied his youth, Finn accepted. His unique connection to the sea was not meant for navigation alone, but for this deeper, more stationary purpose. The division of their order was no longer a plan, but a reality. They were now split between sea and shore, two living libraries for a single legend. The Stormdancer would remain the mobile protector, while the temple would have its eternal caretakers. This ensured that the knowledge of the forgotten realms could never be completely lost to a single storm, a single battle, or a single moment in time. The legacy was now doubly secure, its survival resting on two different kinds of courage. As the Navigator and Finn boarded a small, elegant craft that seemed carved from a single piece of luminous coral, the crew of the Stormdancer lined the rail to watch them go. The little vessel caught a current of its own and slipped silently toward the mist-shrouded horizon, a tiny beacon of light swallowed by the vast protective veil. Aboard their ship, the remaining crew felt the emptiness left by their friends, but also a new, crystalline clarity. Their mission was now sharper and more defined. They were the keepers of the way, the ones who would ensure that the right hearts could always find the path. guided by the stars above and the steadfast guardians waiting on the shore. The original star chart lay unrolled on Alara's workshop desk, its ancient lines a ghost of the journey they had completed. She did not lock it away in a vault or burn it to ash. Instead, she reached for a fresh pot of ink, her hand guided by a new kind of knowledge. She began to draw, not to hide the truth, but to redefine it. Her new lines traced the hidden sea lanes they had discovered, pathways of favorable current, invisible to the ordinary eye. She marked the vast, shimmering boundary of the protective mist, and with careful precision, she charted the safe passages through the once impossible Serpent's maw. This was no longer a map to a lost treasure. It was a map of sacred duty, a detailed guide to the responsibilities they now carried. Cayland watched her work, his arms crossed, a deep unease settling in his gaze. He saw her creating another physical object, another piece of parchment that could be taken, copied, or offered to another. The risk felt like a quiet echo of earlier choices. All it would take was one moment of carelessness, one skilled intruder, and their entire purpose could be undone by those who sought to claim the magic rather than honor it. His worry was a silent storm in the quiet room. Alara understood his fear without a word being spoken. As she put the finishing touches on the coastlines, she did something more. She placed her palms flat on the parchment's edges, closed her eyes, and channeled a subtle, gentle enchantment into the very fibers of the paper. It was not a spell of locking or hiding, but one of recognition. The most sensitive details of the map, the routes through the mist, and the paths to the symbolic place, would only reveal themselves to a reader whose heart held a genuine, selfless love for the sea. To a conqueror or a seeker of fortune, the chart would remain a beautiful but simple artifact, its true depths forever concealed. It was a test of spirit, woven into ink and parchment. With this final act, the chart was transformed into the foundational text of their new order. It was no longer a secret to be kept, but a legacy to be earned, a guide that would only share its full story with those worthy of the trust. This living document gave their mission a tangible permanence, its magic ensuring their purpose would be passed down through the ages, safe from those who might misuse it. Holding the completed map, the sailors of the renewed realms felt their vows settle into something enduring, their promise to the ocean, now etched not only in memory, but in a magic that could discern a true guardian from a mere traveler. The Stormdancer was no longer just a ship. On a morning washed clean by a soft rain, its hull was officially inscribed with a new name, Guardian Vessel of the Renewed Realms. The transformation was more than a title, a subtle, pearlescent sheen, gifted from the temple's own enchanted coral, strengthened its wooden bones, and its sails now seemed to breathe with a will of their own, forever touched by the favorable winds of the heart. In the harbor, it became a minor legend. To the weary fishermen and honest traders, its presence was a comfort, a silent promise that the old magic watched over them. But to the profiteers and ruthless captains who saw the ocean only as a prize to be won, the ship's gentle luminescence stirred a vague, instinctive unease. This tension soon found a voice. A group of Cayland's old rivals, captains of sleek, fast cutters, openly mocked the vessel's new role. They saw it as a ceremonial title for a retired captain and his crew of mystics. They challenged the Stormdancer to a race, a direct test to prove their so-called magic was nothing but clever talk and superstition. The entire dockside waited for Cayland's refusal, expecting a wise but passive retreat. Instead, the old captain accepted with a calm nod, but he did not choose a simple, open water course. He proposed they race through the newly charted, notoriously treacherous Whispering Straits, a narrow passage of jagged rocks and unpredictable, screaming winds that had shattered the confidence of many seasoned sailors. The challenge instantly escalated. This was no longer a contest of speed, but a demonstration of true seamanship. The stakes were the future of their mission itself. A victory would prove the profound value of the knowledge they carried, a harmony with the sea that offered safe passage where brute force often failed. A loss, however, would brand them as frauds, their hard-won credibility dissolving into public ridicule. As the day of the race dawned, the entire port gathered on the cliffs and beaches, a noisy, expectant crowd placing wagers and shouting encouragement or scorn. But beneath the human excitement, a deeper quiet settled over the water. The sea itself seemed to be holding its breath, its surface preternaturally calm, as if waiting to see which vessel truly understood its ancient, whispering heart. The starting horn sounded, and the razor shot from the line like a silver arrow, its sleek hull cutting the water with a powerful grace. Captain Borin's ship was built for speed, and it showed, leaving the Stormdancer in its shimmering wake as both vessels aimed for the mouth of the Whispering Straits. On his own deck, Cayland held a steady, deliberate course, his hands light on the wheel. He did not chase the rival's lead. He was listening, feeling the subtle pull of a deep, favorable current his crew had charted, a river within the sea that Borin, in his haste, completely ignored. From the deck of the Razor, Borin's mocking laughter carried back to them on the wind. He shouted taunts about floating museums and retired sailors, pushing his vessel and his crew to their absolute limits. He saw the Stormdancer's caution as weakness, their respectful navigation as a lack of nerve. He sliced through patches of churning, discolored water that hinted at submerged rocks, and ignored the way his own ship shuddered in the grip of a cross-current. He was winning the race, but he was losing a conversation with the ocean itself, a dialogue where every ripple and sigh held meaning. For a tense, difficult stretch, it seemed Borin's sheer recklessness would be rewarded. The Razor, fueled by arrogance and the desperate efforts of its crew, maintained its lead, entering the narrow, rock-lined throat of the straits first. The sight of their rival pulling ahead sent a wave of doubt through the Guardians. A victory for Borin would not just be a loss, it would be a public disappointment, making their hard-won knowledge seem like a pointless academic exercise next to brute force. The tension on their deck was a physical weight, yet Cayland's gaze never wavered from the Razor's path. He saw the inevitable unfolding in the set of her sails and the angle of her hull. He made a quiet, critical choice. He would not press their advantage or exploit the coming error. Instead, he gave a low order, preparing ropes and the longboat. They would stand ready not to win, but to offer aid. The sound was a sickening, grinding crunch that echoed off the stone walls of the straits. A hidden reef, its peak just beneath the surface at that particular tide, gashed open the Razor's hull. The sleek ship shuddered to a violent halt, its mast snapping like a twig. In moments, the cold, churning water was overtaking the vessel, pulling Borin and his terrified crew from the wreckage and into the unforgiving sea. Their shouts of triumph turned to cries for help in the blink of an eye. Without a moment of hesitation, Cayland spun the Stormdancer's wheel. He sacrificed his position, his chance at victory, and any thought of pride, turning his ship directly toward the wreck. The true test of a guardian was not in winning a race, but in answering a call for help, even from a rival who had shown them only scorn. The Stormdancer cut through the churning water with an unnerving grace, sliding alongside the floundering Razor as if the two vessels were dancing a final, tragic waltz. Lines snaked through the air, and lifebuoys splashed into the cold sea. The crew of the Guardian vessel, moving with a silent, practiced efficiency that spoke of deeper bonds than any ordinary sailor's duty. One by one, Borin and his terrified crew were hauled from the grip of the waves, their shouts of panic fading into stunned, shivering silence as they collapsed onto the safe, solid deck. They watched, humbled and helpless, as the sleek hull of the Razor gave one last groan and slipped beneath the surface, leaving only a swirl of wreckage and a spreading stain on the water. Borin stood dripping on the deck, his pride as soaked and heavy as his wool coat. He had expected scorn, or at the very least, a smug satisfaction from the crew he had so publicly mocked. Instead, he witnessed only calm competence. Lyra was already wrapping a dry blanket around a young sailor who could not stop shaking. Bram was passing around a flask of something warm, his cheerful muttering now a soft, reassuring hum. There was no chaos, only a unified purpose that transformed a rescue into a simple, necessary act. The contrast with his own frantic, failed command was a bitter lesson he had not asked to learn. His gratitude was a stone in his throat. Every time he tried to form the words to thank Cayland, his own arrogance rose up to choke them back. To thank them was to admit his methods were foolish, that his reckless speed was a dangerous arrogance, and that the knowledge he had ridiculed was the very thing that had saved his life. He stood apart, a statue of internal conflict, his gaze fixed on the horizon where his ship had vanished. Once every soul was accounted for, and the immediate shock had passed, Cayland approached him. The old captain did not lecture. He did not mention the race or the taunts. He simply stood beside Borin, both men looking out at the sea. "I have a place for a sailor with your nerve," Cayland said, his voice low and steady. "But courage without respect for the water is just a longer way to lose your way. Your skill is undeniable, Borin. We need that, but we need you to learn to listen more than you shout." The offer was not a pardon, but an invitation to a higher calling. Borin felt the weight of his own survival, the debt that could not be repaid with mere words. His defiance crumbled, not into shame, but into a sober clarity. He looked from Cayland's earnest face to the faces of the crew who had saved his men, and he gave a single, sharp nod. "I will learn," he said, the words finally breaking free. That acceptance became a seismic shift for their fledgling order. The most vocal skeptic, a man whose influence stretched across a dozen trading vessels, became their most fervent advocate. His conversion, born from first-hand experience, carried a weight no philosophical argument ever could. He brought not just his considerable skill, but his hardened, practical followers, men who respected his judgment, even when it led them to a path they never expected to walk. As the Stormdancer turned for home, towing the sad wreckage of the Razor behind it, the crew understood the true nature of their victory. They had not won a race. They had won a heart, and in doing so, had strengthened their shield against the coming tides. The story of the race and the rescue did not simply travel, it ignited. From the crowded taverns to the highest decks of merchant vessels, the tale was told and retold, each telling adding a new layer of awe. The sailors of the renewed realms were no longer seen as eccentric mystics, but as something closer to living legends. They became known as the Guardians, a name spoken with a new kind of respect, one mixed with a quiet hope. In their wake, the ocean itself seemed to breathe a little easier, and people took notice. The first new recruits did not arrive seeking gold or glory. They were the sons and daughters of fishermen who had felt the sea's subtle shifts, young scholars tired of dusty scrolls and hungry for living truth, and even a few seasoned sailors like Borin, humbled by the waves and seeking a deeper purpose than mere profit. They came for the chance to learn the old ways, to sail under the protection of those who understood the ocean's whispered language. This rapid growth, however, was a tide that brought its own challenges. Managing a larger, more diverse group required a new kind of wisdom. How could they instill their core values in dozens of new hearts, each with their own past and motivations? The greatest concern was no longer a creature from the deep, but a careless word spoken in a friendly port, or an ambitious soul who saw their power not as a duty, but as a prize to be won. The secret of the Heart of Ethel was a flame too bright to be entrusted to every hand. Alara and Cayland, standing on the deck of the now legendary Stillness, devised a solution as practical as it was profound. They established a tiered system of knowledge, a slow and careful path of initiation. New members or seekers learned the outer arts, the improved navigation and seamanship that alone could transform a voyage. Only after years of proven loyalty, of demonstrating a selfless love for the sea in both calm and storm, would a sailor be invited to become a warden. And it was to the wardens alone, the most trusted few, that the full, staggering truth was ever revealed, the existence of the heart and the symbolic place it sustained. This structure was not built on distrust, but on a solemn responsibility to protect a wonder that belonged to the world, not to any one person. Their order was now woven permanently into the fabric of maritime life, a living legend that had to constantly earn its place. With their influence growing, their small fleet expanded to a second ship, the Tide Singer, and then a third, the Coral Wing. And as these vessels began their patrols of the forgotten routes, a remarkable phenomenon followed them. Fishermen reported calmer waters and strangely abundant catches in the areas the Guardians sailed, as if the sea was rewarding their presence. The ocean was not just being protected, it was flourishing. This visible blessing solidified their reputation further, turning skepticism into quiet faith. Yet with every new ship and every hopeful recruit, the stakes were quietly raised. They were no longer just guarding a secret. They were nurturing a legacy, and the weight of that responsibility settled deep into the heart of every guardian, a quiet vow to protect the light they carried from the shadows both outside and within. Years had woven threads of silver into Cayland's hair and etched the memory of countless voyages onto his hands, but the sight that greeted him on this calm morning stole his breath. The Guardian fleet had grown from a single, luminous ship into a small armada of peace, vessels of every size and design, from the familiar shape of the Stillness to the sleek lines of Borin's new command, floated in a wide, silent circle at the very edge of the shimmering mist. This was the First Remembrance, a gathering not of war or conquest, but of gratitude. On every deck, captains and crews stood shoulder to shoulder, their faces turned not toward the horizon ahead, but toward the beautiful, pearlescent veil that protected their most sacred trust. They were joined in spirit by those who could not be there in body. Far away on the island, the Navigator and Finn stood before the temple, their own focus reaching out across the waves, a silent thread in a tapestry of shared purpose. There was no grand ceremony, no shouted oath. The covenant was renewed in a profound and collective quiet, a wave of thankful thought sent from hundreds of hearts directly into the deep. It was an offering of thanks for safe passage, for abundant seas, and for the privilege of their duty. In that unified silence, something miraculous happened. The mist, which had never before yielded to any command, began to stir. It did not vanish, but it softened, its luminous density parting like a curtain drawn aside by an unseen hand. And there, for one glorious, heart-stopping moment, they saw it. The Heart of Ethel hung in the center of the archipelago, no longer a dim, fading ember but a brilliant, stable sun at the center of their world, pulsing with a light that was both ancient and entirely new. Its radiant energy was now visibly intertwined with the hopes and actions of every sailor present, a living circuit of magic and devotion. This was the true, quiet climax of their long journey. The legend was no longer a thing to be found and protected. It had become a reciprocal force, a living breath sustained by every choice to listen, every act of courage, and every moment of quiet thanks. The relationship between humanity and the ancient seas had been forever rewritten, not by a single heroic deed, but by the patient, daily choice of an entire community to remember. The helm was cool and familiar beneath Ilara's palms, a solid anchor in a world remade. She was no longer the woman who had taken a chart from a quiet archive, guided by a deep and personal longing. That memory was a smooth, blank stone in the river of her mind, its sharp edges softened by the constant flow of the ocean's consciousness. In its place was a foundation built from shared journeys and quiet triumphs. From the faces of the crew, she now called family, and the gentle, luminous presence of the fleet surrounding her ship. The Forgotten Realms were no longer a name from a hidden text. They were a living breath in the world, a rhythm felt in every calm wave and every favorable wind that filled their sails. The ancient seas were no longer silent. They whispered on the breeze that tousled a young sailor's hair. They shimmered in the glowing path, a pod of dolphins carved through the night water, and they pulsed in the steady, synchronized beat of the heart. A star kept safe not in a distant temple, but in the shared will of those who had chosen to remember. This was the true map she had spent her life searching for, not drawn on parchment, but etched into the very spirit of a new generation of sailors. They navigated not just by the stars above, but by the deeper constellations of courage and care within themselves. The legend was complete, not because it had ended, but because it had been seamlessly woven into the fabric of everyday life, a promise as enduring as the tides. And as Ilara watched the sun set, painting the sails of her fleet in hues of gold and violet, she knew with a quiet certainty that the greatest stories were never those simply found and finished. They were the ones that were patiently, lovingly built, then passed like a compass into waiting hands, ready to guide the way for journeys yet to come.